Golden dust particles dance in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window, like distant memories awakening in my mind. Time flows like the Wisconsin River in spring, sometimes rushing violently, sometimes flowing peacefully. I am Catherine Kowalski Miller, born into a Polish family in rural Wisconsin in 1964. My once golden hair has now turned white, but my blue eyes still gleam with something from the past. Each wrinkle on my face tells a true story about the pain of losing my mother when I was only 9 years old, about the family secret that weighed heavily on my grandmother's heart for many decades, and about the love that saved me like a hot loaf of bread from the bakery of yesteryear. I have kept silent for too long. Today, as memories return like migratory birds finding their way back to their old nest, I want to tell you everything. I am the daughter of Theodore Ted Kowalski and Joan Miller. My father's name was difficult for Americans to pronounce, but he never wanted to change it. He said it carried the entire family history. Everyone in town eventually learned to say it correctly because he kept correcting them. With that patience of his, people always commented on how different I looked from my mother. I took after my father, blonde with blue eyes and that distinctive Kowalski nose. It was funny to see old photos, all the relatives on Dad's side with that same nose. My mother was a beautiful American woman with honey-cold eyes that looked like two precious stones. Her nose was small and delicate, very different from mine, and she had long shoulder-length brown hair. When I was little, I would sit for hours behind her combing all that hair. She taught me how to make beautiful braided plaits. Our house was a large farmhouse with many acres of land, a heritage from the time when the government gave land to immigrants. It was a wooden house with a front porch where we spent our afternoons. In the yard, we had everything: an orchard, a vegetable garden, chickens, pigs. My father worked on the farm, planting as much as he could, and my mother took care of the house, but also helped with the planting. Life was different back then. We didn't even have a television, just an old radio that my father would turn on at night. The streets were all dirt roads when it rained. Oh my goodness. But you know what? We were happy that way. We had church festivals, community dances. Everyone knew each other and helped each other. Our region had many Polish Americans, as we called ourselves. It was funny to see how everything mixed together. The food, the way of speaking, the customs. On our table, we had pierogi and beans, and my father spoke English with that strong accent he never lost. At home, it was like this. On one side, the stories of Poland that my father told. On the other, the stories of America that came from my mother's family. At Easter, we painted eggs and blessed the food in the Polish way. But we also never missed a 4th of July celebration with hot apple cider and bonfires. You know, we were a big family. There were 4 of us siblings. Peter, who was the oldest, then Joseph, Joe, then me, and finally Anthony, Tony, whom we called Tony. We all looked like my father. Polish blood is strong, he used to say. Our house was always full of noise, laughter, running around. My mother used to say that children are like popcorn. One pops after another. Peter was always the most responsible one, helping Dad on the farm from an early age. Joe was quieter, liking to stay in corners reading. I stayed more with Mom, learning household things. And Tony, well, he was everyone's favorite. The baby. Mom was the center of our house. Everything went through her. Early in the morning, she was already up lighting the wood stove to make coffee. The smell of the bread she baked traveled across the street, and every now and then a neighbor would appear with the excuse of asking for a cup of sugar. just to get a piece of warm bread. She had a special way of doing things. When she washed clothes in the tub, she hummed those old songs her grandmother had taught her. Her shoulder-length hair swayed as she wrung out the sheets, and I would sit there on a little stool just admiring her. Sometimes she pinned flowers in her hair, those that we picked from the garden. She looked even more beautiful. We didn't have much, but we never lacked food on the table. Mom also helped with the planting, but she always managed to be home when we got back from school. There was always coffee with a snack waiting, even if it was just polenta with milk. I remember she sewed our clothes. She had an old Singer machine, one of those pedal ones. At night, after everyone had had dinner, she would sit there sewing by the light of the lamp because the electric light was weak, and went out every now and then. She made dresses for me from the scraps of fabric that neighbors brought for her to sew. 1973 was the year that changed everything. I was 9 years old. It was so sudden. Mom started feeling sharp pains. Dad took her to the big city to the doctor. When she came back, she was different, quieter. She started to lose weight, lose that glow she had. We didn't really understand what was happening. One Sunday morning, I'll never forget, she couldn't get up to make breakfast. Dad told us to stay in the bedroom, but I sneaked out when the neighbors started to appear. That afternoon, our mother passed away. The wake was in our church and funeral home, as was the custom in America at that time. The women from the community communally arranged everything. The smell of coffee mixed with the strong smell of candles and flowers. There were so many flowers. Everyone who came brought more. I stood there in a corner of the room looking at that scene that made no sense. My mother there so quiet, so beautiful. She really looked like she was just sleeping. Her blue dress, the one she saved for special occasions, someone had chosen to dress her in. Her hair all arranged with the flowers she loved so much I couldn't cry. People passed their hands over my head, said things I didn't really hear. I just stood there waiting. In my child's mind, I was sure that in a little while she would open her eyes, get up, and everyone would see that it was just a longer sleep. Maybe if I stayed there really quiet, she would wake up faster. But it was at the cemetery that it sank in. When I saw the men taking that coffin, carrying her close to that dark hole, then yes, I was overcome with such despair. I started screaming, clinging to my father's legs, begging them not to do that to my mother. Peter held me tight, but I struggled, cried so hard I could barely breathe. It was the first time I saw my father crying in front of everyone. That day ended my childhood. I only really understood what happened to my mother much later. She had lost a baby, was pregnant again. It would have been our little brother, but she had a severe hemorrhage, and then when she got home, she had complications. How many mothers did Wellis like that in rural areas due to lack of adequate care? If it were today, with the antibiotics they have, the better hospitals, maybe she would have been saved. But at that time in our little corner of Wisconsin, life was harder, especially for women. After we buried her, the house became different. The silence seemed to have weight. Dad tried to do things as best he could, but it wasn't the same. The food never tasted the same. The clothes never fit well. The garden began to die little by little. Peter, at 13, tried to help as much as he could. Joe closed himself off even more in his books. Tony, poor thing, was very small, only 5 years old. He called for Mom at night, and I tried to do the things I saw Mom do. She had taught me a lot of things. She said that every woman should know how to do these things, for when she got married to know how to take care of the house properly. So, I already knew how to wash clothes, iron, cook simple things. She had even started teaching me how to make bread. I remember the day after the funeral. I woke up early and went to the kitchen. I lit the wood stove just like I saw Mom do every day. I made coffee, cut the bread that the neighbors had left. When Dad and the boys woke up, the table was already set. Dad looked at me sadly, passed his hand over my head, and said, "My daughter." He didn't say anything else, but I understood that he was proud and sad at the same time. From then on, I did what I could. I washed the boys' clothes, tidied the house, made simple food. It wasn't like Mom made it, of course, but it was enough. Dad sometimes tried to help me, but he didn't know much about these household things. He spent more time on the farm, working double to make up for the fact that Mom was no longer there to help. The neighbors would come from time to teach me things I still didn't know how to do properly. Mrs. Mary taught me how to make polenta without lumps. Mrs. Rose showed me how to remove stains from clothes. I learned quickly. I had to learn, right? There was no other way. It was a very difficult time for all of us. We had to learn to live in a new way without Mom's smile lighting up the house, without that voice humming while doing things. Dad, poor thing, was lost. During the day, he buried himself in work, came home late and tired. At night, I heard him walking around the house restlessly. Sometimes, I found him sitting in the kitchen chair, staring at nothing with a cup of cold coffee in his hand. He tried, but he didn't know how to deal with it all. Dad was different from other men I saw around. He was in love with my mother in a way that seemed like something out of a movie. I remember well how he always hugged her, kissed her on the cheek when he came in from the farm, even all sweaty and talk. They talked for hours, especially after dinner. Dad always wanted to know her opinion on everything from what corn to plant, to what to name the new calves. It was beautiful to see, I would watch secretly and compare with other couples I knew. Our neighbors' husbands, the uncles, most barely looked at their wives' faces, spoke little, and when they did speak, it was only to give orders or complain about something. But Dad, no. He looked at Mom as if he was seeing the most beautiful sunset in the world every day. After she was gone, it seemed like a part of him had gone with her. He continued doing things, working, taking care of us in his way. But his eyes didn't have that sparkle anymore. At that time, I dropped out of school. Things were changing little by little. We were learning to live without Mom, even if it hurt. Dad started coming home earlier, tried to talk more with us. Once he even tried to braid my hair like Mom used to. It came out all crooked, but I left it that way just to see the smile on his face. Look, something happened to me afterward that's difficult to talk about. It's not something I go around talking about, but it's part of what made me who I am today. So, I think you need to know this. It happened a few months after Mom passed away. The house was still in that confusion with relatives coming and going all the time. One day, Julian, the son of my aunt, April, arrived. He was older, must have been about 14 at the time, and I had just turned 10. At first, it was even good to have him around. It was fun, He knew a lot of new games, told funny stories. We would play in the yard, climb trees, those things kids do. But then things changed. One afternoon, everyone was busy. Dad on the farm, the boys helping, and the aunts in the kitchen preparing dinner. I was in the bedroom arranging some clothes. Julian appeared at the door with a strange manner. He said he wanted to show me something cool. He came into the room and closed the door. He started to get close, saying strange things, that I was beautiful. That my blue eyes like the sky and golden hair like the sun drove him crazy. I tried to scream, but he covered my mouth, heppished me on the bed, always with his hand on my mouth. I started to tremble. I didn't understand what was happening. I thought it was a tasteless joke until I realized it wasn't. He started to lift my dress, touching places that left me scared and ashamed. Then he grabbed my hand and forced me to touch him in a way that I knew was wrong. I know you understand what I'm trying to say. It was terrifying for me. He was very strong. I just thought that I wanted someone to save me. That's when the door suddenly opened. It all happened very quickly. It was Dad. I'll never forget the look on his face at that moment. First it was shock, then a rage I'd never seen before. Dad grabbed Julian by the collar, almost lifted him off the ground. He started yelling, calling him shameless, a good-for-nothing. I had never heard my father speak that way. He dragged Julian out of the room to the yard. I followed, scared, not really understanding what was going on. In the yard, Dad threw Julian to the ground, took off his belt, and well, it was ugly. He hit him hard, shouting that he was going to teach him to respect the girls in the family. And April came running, screaming for Dad to stop, but he was blind with rage. He only stopped when Peter and Uncle John managed to hold him back. Julian was all hurt, crying, begging for his uncle's forgiveness. Aunt April, who was my mother's sister, took him and left right away, cursing everyone. After they left, there was that heavy silence. Everyone looking at me, some with pity, others not knowing what to say. Dad hugged me tightly, crying, asked for forgiveness, said he would always protect me. I didn't really understand what had happened, only knew it was something very bad. That night, I heard Dad talking with Aunt Betty in the kitchen. Aunt Betty Kowalski was my father's sister. Dad was saying he was worried, saying he didn't know how to take care of a girl alone, that he was afraid he couldn't protect me. Aunt Betty talked about Grandma, their mother, who lived in the city. She said that maybe it would be better for me to go live with her for a while. The next day, Dad called me to talk. He explained that I was going to spend some time with Grandma Sophie, that it was for my own good. He said that there I would be able to study better, have more opportunities. He said he would visit me whenever he could. I didn't want to go. I was afraid of leaving my brothers, of being far from Dad. You know, I loved all my brothers, but my favorite was Tony. It broke my heart to imagine living far from him, but also a part of me wanted to get out of there. After that day with Julian, I didn't feel safe at home anymore. I had nightmares, got scared with any noise. It was hard to say goodbye. Tony cried so much, didn't understand why I had to go. Joe stayed quiet as always, but he also cried a lot. Peter, he hugged me tight and said, "It will be better for you, Kathy, but don't forget about us, okay?" Dad took me in the old pickup truck to the train station. It was a long and silent journey. He tried to talk about happy things, but you could see he was suffering. The train journey was a novelty for me. I had never ridden on one before. When we arrived in the city, Grandma was already waiting at the station. Grandma Sophie was a serious lady, one of those old-fashioned ones, you know. She wasn't very affectionate, but she hugged Dad in a way that surprised me. To me, it was as if I was seeing her for the first time. They say she had seen me when I was younger. Beauty didn't remember anything. Grandma didn't even come to Mom's funeral. Said it was too far to travel. Dad cried in Grandma's arms. He looked like a child. The only time I had seen him like that was at Mom's funeral. Grandma promised she would take good care of me. She hugged me too a bit awkwardly, but she hugged me. Dad went with me to Grandma's house. When we got there, I was open-mouthed. The house was beautiful, had beautiful furniture, the kind we only saw in magazines. And I had a room just for me. Imagine me, who always shared a room with the boys, now having a little corner all to myself. Dad stayed for a whole day. He and Grandma talked a lot, sometimes whispering in a corner, other times arguing loudly in the kitchen. Grandma lived alone in that big Victorian house in Milwaukee, and you could see that Dad was worried about leaving me there. But what could he do? After what happened, everyone thought it was better for me to be away for a while. When it was time for Dad to leave, we all went to the station. It was the first time I felt what it was like to truly have a broken heart. What a sad scene. I wanted so much to stay with Dad. I felt so much anger at that cousin. Because of him, I was there. If he hadn't done that, but there was no use thinking about it now. In the first few days, I began to notice some strange things. The neighborhood didn't seem to like Grandma much. They would say good morning, good afternoon, but that was it. I would see groups of ladies whispering in the street, and my grandma was never among them. Grandma didn't talk much to me at first. I tried to help. I would see things dirty and go to clean them, but I soon realized she didn't like that. She would go there and do everything again her way. I would always go to sleep frustrated, thinking that nothing was ever good enough. It was hard to please her. It seemed like I never did anything right. Then one day she came to tell me that she had enrolled me in school. I was excited. At least I would have something to do besides staying in that house. On the first day she took me. Afterward I went alone. Over time I made friends with some girls. They started coming to my house to pick me up, and we would walk talking all the way to school. The school was very different from the one I went to back in the countryside. It had more students, more teachers, and we learned things I had never heard of. At first, it was difficult. I felt dumb compared to the others, but little by little, I got used to it. The girls at school were curious about me. I was any of the few blonde, blue-eyed girls around there. They wanted to know why I had come to live with Grandma, why my accent was different. I didn't know what to say, how to explain what had happened. So, I made up some stories. I said my father had gone to work far away, and that's why I was there. At home, things continued strange with Grandma. She wasn't bad, just different. One day, I was tidying my room and found some old photos in a shoebox. In one of them, there was a beautiful woman smiling, hugging a young man who looked like my father when he was younger. Then I realized it was Dad and Mom. I showed it to Grandma and asked if she had more photos. She was quiet for a while, then said yes and brought some dusty albums. Grandma said she hadn't looked at those photos for more than 10 years. She was very sad. She looked at another photo of my mother and said, this was taken when they were dating. It was the first time Grandma talked about my mother. I noticed her eyes got watery. She continued, your mother was a good girl. Pity she left so early. In those photos, I saw many people I didn't know, most polished like us. Grandma looked with a distant gaze. I was afraid to ask who they were, so I just turned the pages. She didn't say anything either. The days went by and I got used to that new life. The longing for home still squeezed my heart, but it didn't hurt as much anymore. Dad wrote letters from time to time telling how things were going back home. He said the boys were growing up, that the farm was going well. I also wrote to him telling everything that happened to me and Grandma. I told about school, new friends, the different things I saw in the city. But I never talked about the difficult things, about how sometimes I cried in hiding, missing him and my brothers. I didn't want him to worry. One day, a different letter arrived. It was from Peter, my oldest brother. He wrote secretly from Dad. He said he missed me, that the house wasn't the same without me. At the end of the letter, he asked, "Kathy, do you think you'll ever be able to come back?" That question kept hammering in my head. Would I be able to return one day? And if I returned, would things be as before? Time went by and I grew up. When I turned 16, I decided it was time for me to start working. Almost all my friends were already working. Grandma didn't like the idea at all. "A family girl doesn't work outside," she would say. But I insisted. I wanted to have my own money, be independent. Everything I wanted to do, I had to ask her. And many times I wanted something, but didn't ask for fear she wouldn't give me the money. I got my first job in a bakery, even with Grandma grumbling. It started early before sunrise. At first, my wrists would ache from kneading so much bread, making cookies, but I liked it. The smell of warm bread reminded me of my mother. Grandma kept complaining about my work. She said I would be talked about in the neighborhood, that a girl's place was at home. But I stood my ground. I wanted my independence. Didn't want to depend on anyone. We argued a lot because of this. Grandma was tough, but deep down I knew she just wanted to protect me in her way. It was there at the bakery that I met John. He was the son of Mr. Anthony Williams, the owner. A handsome guy, always smiling. At first, we barely spoke. I felt awkward remembering what had happened with Julian. But John was different. He was gentle, respectful. One day, he invited me for ice cream after work. I was afraid to accept, but I ended up going. We talked so much that we didn't even notice the time pass. He told me about his dreams of one day having his own bakery. I talked about my life in the countryside, the longing I felt for my family. We started meeting more often in secret, of course. If Grandma knew, oh my, she was always saying that men were no good, that I had to be careful. But John was different. He respected me, made me laugh. With him, I could be myself. The work at the bakery was hard, but I liked it. I learned to make bread, cake, pie. Mr. Anthony said I had a good hand for dough. I started saving some money, kept it hidden under the mattress. I still didn't know what I would do with the money, but it was there. Some I gave to Grandma, and the rest I saved. One day, John kissed me. It was behind the bakery when we were storing the milk crates. My heart almost came out of my mouth. It was different from anything I had ever felt. For the first time, I understood what it was like to truly like someone. I could only think of him. We started dating in secret. I was terrified that Grandma would find out, but it was so good. John made me feel. We made plans, dreamed about the future. He talked about getting married, having our own bakery. I was torn between the joy of being with him and the fear of disappointing Grandma. At this time, Dad's letters were becoming rarer. He was sick, Peter wrote, telling me. I was worried, wanted to go back to take care of him. When I told Grandma about Dad's illness, I saw her change right away. All that toughness disappeared from her eyes. "We have to go see your father," she said without thinking twice. I was surprised. I had never seen Grandma like this. For her to leave the house, and especially on a trip, was a rare thing. We packed hastily. I tried to talk to John, explain the situation, but he wasn't at the bakery that day. I left a note promising I would return. My heart was tight having to leave him like that without saying goodbye properly. The journey back to the countryside was long. The train swayed, making that noise that seemed to lull us. Grandma spent most of the time looking out the window, lost in her thoughts. I kept imagining what I would find at home, how Dad would be. At one point in the journey, Grandma turned to me. Her eyes were different, softer. "Kathy," she said, "I think it's time I tell you some things." She started talking about the past, about when she was young. She told me that Grandpa Stanley was a widower when they got married. Aunt Betty, who was already a young woman, didn't like her at all. She said I would never be her mother, Grandma said with a somewhat trembling voice. I was surprised. Honestly, I didn't know that. The aunt looked so much like my father. I thought Grandma was her mother, too. I had never seen Grandma so open. She continued telling me that she took on four of Grandpa Stanley's children, Aunt Betty's brothers. There were 3 boys and Aunt Betty, just like me and my brothers. In the beginning, it was difficult, she said, but over time, Betty started accepting her. The boys, too. Grandma had her own children with Grandpa Stanley. They were a big family now with the children from Grandpa's first marriage, and the new ones that came, including my father. The Kowalski brick and tile factory was doing well, providing for everyone. It seemed like everything was going well until her voice failed. It was a tragedy, Kathy, she said, her eyes full of water. Your grandfather and the 3 older boys, the ones he had when he married me. When I say older, I mean older than your Aunt Betty, because actually the oldest of them was only 17. All of them died in an accident at the brick factory of my family. Grandma took a deep breath before continuing. It was horrible. A tractor out of control ran over them. That day, besides them, Mrs. Carmen's husband, who also worked there, died. I was speechless. I had never heard about this. Grandma continued, her voice low. Betty, she blamed me. She said if it hadn't entered their lives, this wouldn't have happened. That if her father hadn't married me, they wouldn't have been working at that brick factory. She paused and then added, she lost everything. Betty was your father's half-sister from your grandfather Stanley's first marriage. Well, now you know, Kathy, Grandma explained. The brick factory was in my family for generations. My grandfather started the business, passed it to my father, and then it stayed with me and my brothers. When I married your grandfather, Stanley, he came to work at our family business, bringing his older children with him to learn the trade. My father was the one who arranged my marriage to your grandpa, Stanley, because he was from a Polish family, just like us. After the accident, Betty couldn't bear to stay. She said the brick factory of my family was cursed. She left and went to live near her father's relatives. But I don't blame her, Kathy. The poor thing went through a lot. It was then that I understood the connection. I started to speak and Grandma completed. That's right. She went to live there near where you all lived. And since she was very good friends with your mother after she married your father, and Peter was born, Betty convinced her and your father to go live there, too. I was thinking about how all of that was new to me. How could there be so many events in our family and I didn't know anything about them? I wondered if my brothers knew about this. It's been more than 15 years since I've seen Betty, Grandma said, looking out the train window. I'm afraid of how it will be if she wants to talk to me after so much time. If she still blames me for what happened at the brick factory. Now I understood better why Grandma was the way she was. All that toughness, that closed-off manner was a shield to protect a heart that had suffered too much, carrying not just the pain of loss, but also the weight of being indirectly responsible for the tragedy, for being from the family that owned the brick factory where everything happened. When we arrived, it was one surprise after another. Dad was bedridden, thinner than I remembered, but his eyes lit up when he saw me. He had had a stroke, which explained why the letters had become rarer. Seeing him there, weak in bed, broke my heart, but Grandma's presence seemed to give him new energy. The boys had grown so much. Peter and Joe were already grown men, and Tony, who was so small when I left, was already a 12-year-old boy. He was going to be a tall Polish man like my brothers because he was already taller than me. But the biggest surprise was seeing Aunt Betty there. When the two of them saw each other, they stood still looking at each other. I thought the aunt was going to turn her back and leave, but suddenly the two of them hugged, crying. It was beautiful to see. The following days were of intense care and concern, but also of hope. It was good to be home again, to see everyone, to take care of Dad. But I couldn't stop thinking about John, what he would be thinking if he had read my note. Grandma took charge, making teas, applying compresses, and insisting that Dad do light exercises every day. It was incredible to see how she knew exactly what to do. Little by little, Dad got better. First, he managed to sit up in bed by himself. Then, with our help, he started taking a few steps around the room. A week after our arrival, he was already sitting on the porch talking with the neighbors who came to visit. Seeing Dad getting better was an enormous relief. The doctor who came to see him said it was a miracle that usually recovery from a stroke took much longer. But there he was, 2 weeks later, already walking around the house, still a bit slowly, but on his own. It was at this time that I started thinking about going back to the city. Dad was much better. The boys and Grandma could take care of him, and I needed to resolve my life. See, John returned to my work at the bakery. Grandma seemed like a different person there. She helped take care of Dad, talked with Aunt Betty, laughed at the stories the boys told. One night, she sat next to me on the porch and said, "Kathy, I know sometimes I'm hard on you, but it's because I want the best for you. Seeing your father like this made me think about a lot of things." I was emotional. It was the first time Grandma talked to me like this. I told her about John, about the plans we had. I thought she was going to get angry, but she just smiled and said, "If he makes you happy, my daughter, don't let him get away." One afternoon, Dad called me to the room and asked, "Daughter, are you happy there in the city?" I told him about the work in the bakery, about John. He looked at me with affection and said, "Then go back there, build your life. Just don't forget about us here." When it was time to go back, it was hard to say goodbye again. But this time, it was different. I knew I could come back whenever I wanted, that my family would always be there for me. Grandma decided to stay a bit longer. She said she wanted to take the opportunity to catch up, to spend time with them. She gave me the keys to the house. On the train back to the city, I kept thinking about everything that had happened, about how life takes turns. Who would have thought that it took a scare with my father's health to bring the family closer together? When I arrived in the city, I went straight to the bakery, my heart pounding. John was there kneading bread. When he saw me, he dropped everything and came running. He hugged me tightly as if afraid I would disappear again. He covered me with kisses. "My Polish girl came back," he said with a smile from ear to ear. I told him everything about Dad, about Grandma, about how I had decided to stay in the city. He smiled. That smile I loved so much, and said, "Then let's make our plans become reality." At that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. John took me to talk with his parents, Mr. Anthony and Mrs. Mary. I was nervous, thinking they were going to be angry because I had disappeared like that. But to my surprise, they welcomed me with open arms. Mrs. Mary even cried when I told my story about Mom and Dad. It was Mr. Anthony who gave the idea of the wedding. "You like each other. Your hard work. Why wait?" he said. And so out of nowhere, we started planning a wedding. Mrs. Mary was an angel. She took care of everything from the dress to the party. "You're the daughter I never had," she would tell me as we chose the flowers or tried the cakes. I sent a letter to Dad and Grandma with the news. The answer came quickly. They were happy for me and promised to come to the wedding. I was relieved to know that Dad was already well enough to travel. The days flew by between wedding preparations and work at the bakery. John and I made plans for the future, dreaming of our own bakery. One day, when the big day arrived, I could hardly believe it. The little church was all decorated, full of people. I saw my father coming in, Grandma, Aunt Betty. His eyes sparkled with pride. My brothers came too, all dressed up, looking like city boys. The ceremony was beautiful. When John said yes, holding my hand, I felt that everything in my life had led me to that moment. In that little church with all the people I loved. The party was at the bakery itself. Mr. Anthony and Mrs. Mary had prepared everything. There was bread of all kinds, cakes, sweets. The whole city seemed to have shown up to celebrate with us. In the middle of the party, Grandma called me to a corner. She had an envelope in her hand. "Kathy," she said, "I've made a decision. That beautiful house in the city where you lived with me, it's yours now. Yours and John's." I was speechless. Grandma continued, "I'm going to stay living with your father. The country air did me good, you know, and he needs someone nearby. My other children are scattered throughout America, and I don't know how much longer I have to live. I want to stay close to my children, Betty, and your father." I hugged Grandma, crying with emotion. She, who had always been so tough, was there giving me the biggest gift I could imagine. "But Grandma," I said, and she smiled in that way of hers, a bit to the side. "Don't worry about me, girl. I'm going back to my roots, and who knows, maybe we'll reopen the brick factory. Your father is full of ideas." I saw Aunt Betty approaching. She hugged Grandma and said, smiling, "Kathy, Sophie is going to stay near me now, and nobody will take her away. We're finally like a real family again." At that moment, I understood that the wedding wasn't just mine and John's. It was a new beginning for the whole family. The party continued late into the night. John and I danced, ate, laughed. Looking around, I saw so many joys and could only thank God for the blessings. Our first night was at a farm hotel in the city, a perfect night of much love and respect. In the days that followed, my family went back to the countryside little by little. Dad, much better now, promised to visit often. Grandma, before going, taught me all the secrets of the house. "Take good care of it," she said. "There's a lot of history inside here." At first, it was strange. The house seemed too big for just the two of us, but little by little, we filled it with our own history. The work at the bakery continued. Mr. Anthony started teaching me more about the business. One day, he would say, "You could have a place just like this." John and I worked hard, saving every penny we could to one day open our own bakery. The years went by. We had children. First Joan, in honor of my blessed mother, then Vincent, Henry, Susan, and finally Vera. The house suddenly became small, full of laughter and running around. One fine day, the dream of our own bakery became a reality. It was hard at the beginning. There were days we barely slept, but little by little, it became famous in the region. My brothers built their families are still running the brick factory that Dad reopened with Grandma and Aunt Betty. Thank God no tragedy ever happened there again. It was beautiful to see how they managed to transform that sad story into something good. The brick factory grew a lot. It started small just for the region, but today they send brick and tile to half the world. Dad, before he passed, was so proud to see the business prospering. Grandma too. She said it was a way to honor the memory of Grandpa Stanley and the boys who passed away. And speaking of a growing family, my children have given me many grandchildren. All my children were born with Polish looks. Now I understood what my father always said. That Polish blood is strong, blonde hair, light eyes, and that characteristic nose. But thank God, their noses diminished with the generations. My grandchildren came mixed, some brown-haired, others blonde. A beautiful mix of Polish and American. Today, at 61, I have a total of 14 grandchildren. Vincent alone gave me 6. The rest is divided among the other children. It's a joy to see this mix, each with their own way, but all carrying a little bit of our history. When everyone gets together here at home or at the bakery, it's a real celebration. There are grandchildren everywhere, some helping to make bread, others just wanting to eat. I sit looking and thinking about how life takes turns. From a small town girl, I became this doting grandmother of such a large and beautiful family. At sunset, when golden sunlight streams through the bakery windows, I often sit amidst the aroma of flour and the laughter of my grandchildren, looking back on my entire life like a loaf of golden baked bread from simple ingredients, sometimes bitter, but ultimately becoming sweet and nourishing to the soul. Polish blood flows in me and in my grandchildren, as strong as the roots of an old oak tree on Wisconsin soil, yet blended with the vitality of American land. The wounds from the past have healed, leaving scars not to cause pain, but to remind us that brokenness can lead to a new beginning. Finally, I understand that family isn't where we're born, but where we learn to live. The fragments of life, when baked in the oven of time, always become the most delicious bread. If you enjoyed my story, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next family stories from our American memories.